So there's one added little trick that's called equivalent lengths. And that's this idea of converting a minor loss. Let's say you draw this picture for a section of pipe, and you say, I just want that to equal an equivalent length section of a pipe. So I'm just going to add longer pipe. So abstractly what you're doing is you're taking components and you're just equating them to a very, very long pipe. So the picture you draw in your head for these types of problems, right, is you have a bunch of components at first and draw them out to know what components to look for. Some more, something like that. And then you go, well, I'll now just make these equivalent lengths and just turn this whole problem into the long straight pipe problem that we've done before, where these would be, here's one equivalent length, here is another equivalent length, let's say here's another equivalent length. So I like doing this actually because it turns all those summation formulas into sort of one easy, manageable thing. But what is the equivalent length? Well, they're not that bad because remember the minor head losses. What were they? You have some head loss coefficient that is from measurements, your velocities, and you say that you want to make this an equivalent length. So you want to make it look like a Darcy friction factor. So you equate this to this type of expression where you make it look like a major head loss, right? So then you just solve this expression for this value. So equivalent lengths are exactly this. So it seems like extra work, but it turns out to be pretty nice. Later on, I can show you why, if we solve many, many, many pipe problems, if you can get everything in terms of equivalent length, you can get a very clear understanding of how flow rate is affected by lengths and other things like that. But this is just another type of, all these are just Excel formulas. You just figure out how to get this quantity from other cells in the value. So this is a cell, and now these friction factors are also cells. So then for the friction factors, right, how does that work? So say you just are connecting them like this, and sort of a bunch, and say these diameters are the same. Okay, so for this major head loss, you would have calculated right, for this one, you would have had an F associated to it. Now, if you have some component right here, and it's the same diameter, well, it's going to have the same friction factor. So for your equivalent length, right, what's the equation, right? You have, it's just this exact one that's associated to the long straight section pipe problem. There's another thing that's sort of troublesome. Right, and that is if if you have a component to a now bigger diameter pipe. So this is now sort of this is now some sort of valve and an expansion at the exact same time. So what do you do in this situation if I have, this component and then this component? Well, you have to just, so for something like this, you can still do these equivalent lengths. You just need to have that this would be, this is a K valve. And then right here, sort of right in between, that would be a K expansion. So then for this equivalent length, right? For this equivalent length, remember, for this long straight section, you would have had to calculate that friction factor. So for this one, you use this friction factor. And now you can get stuck and go, well, what do I do? Well, how do I get the equivalent length of, like, let's say this expansion or contraction, right? Well, so the K, if you remember, we get this loss coefficient, we can calculate it based on the faster velocity. So that means this one. Use the faster one always. Use the fastest velocity you're talking about. So this K uses the velocity in section 1. So, right, that makes sense that you also would still use the friction factor of the fastest one as well. You wouldn't use this friction factor. You use this one. So that's just to clear up in, like, the project and other types of problems. You would have this long section to a component, to another long section, but it's a thicker diameter, so you can get lost of how to calculate these things, of what F's to use. But always hold on to use the faster velocity for these pipe problems.